everyone, it's Jackie at the Spare Room Studio and I'm back today to do another little test in Wildflower Folk by Karron. This time I want to try using Crayola Supertips. I have the pastel set that I bought recently and haven't used yet, and I have the 100 set of Crayola Supertips. So nothing outlandish, just budget supply. I want to test these and see how they work in this particular book, and I want to use the plate method, using the scribbling the marker onto the plate and maybe try it direct onto the paper. We'll see how things go. And I've decided I'd like to do this one here. It's called Wood Elfling, which is kind of cute. And I've got some paper towel, I've got my old plate and water brush, and I'm going to get started. Now I haven't picked any colours out as yet. I'm going to do that here with you. I think most people would be familiar with Supertips, Crayola Supertips. I've had them in the past and then used them or given them away or whatever, and recently bought this new set because there was a really good deal on, and I decided to get a set of these again, and also try those set of pastel colours. I can't remember whose channel it was that I saw it on, but I saw somebody had them, and I decided that it was time I wanted to give them a go again. So I've got a whole selection of greens here. Of course, with Crayola Supertips, there are no markings of numbers or colours on the markers themselves. There is a bit of a colour chart on the back, but no names or anything. And that really suits me down to the ground, because I'm really not about making sure I have specific colours, as you know. So let's get started. We'll jump in. And I'm going to try and keep this, because she's a wood elfling, I'd like to keep a lot of sort of natural colours, but I'd like to bring in some pops of colour, maybe with the flower and the apple, maybe some details on her outfit. So I'm actually going to start with the shirt first. And once again, my neighbour's lawnmower man has turned up just as I've wanted to do this, so apologies if he does make it into the background. So these are really diluting very nicely, working this way. Now you may or may not know, if you've watched any of my other videos, that I have a tendency to use a lot of water. It's how I like to work. I just like the way that the the colours and the pigment move more when you've got more water. And so I will actually accept the damage that I do to my paper and my book, purely so I can have that result with the blended colours. So while that's damp, I'm going to drop that darker colour into the areas where Christine's put some grayscale that suggests some shadow or form. So where she's done that, I'm just going to gently touch that tip of the water brush back into the damp areas and let that blend in with the lighter green there. So if you're new to this sort of thing, a really simple way to start thinking about your colour mixing is try to get a light, medium and dark of whatever colour you've got. Sometimes if you don't have three shades of the one colour in the set that you're working with, say for example you're using orange and red, you can always supplement yellow into the mix if it's warranted. So that's a very simple way to start thinking about shadows and getting form and so on, variations in colours, is just to have a light, medium and dark. There's a lot more to colour theory than that, of course, and there's colour families and there's warm and cool colours and so on, but you know, don't overcomplicate things too much if you're just starting. Just, you know, pick 3 shades and have a go. You can always introduce some white to bring highlights in, and then maybe a darker colour to bring in deeper shadow. I wouldn't suggest black per se, but I do like deep blues, deep grey, purple, deep green, whatever sort of blends in with the colours in your picture. Think about using those colours in a deeper shade for the shadowy areas. And that's a really simple way to get started thinking about getting some variation in the tones of your colours. I like to save black for the very darkest dark areas that you want of something, but not necessarily shadows. And I sort of limit my use of black. That just goes back to some art class days when I had a teacher suggest that when you're watercolour painting, save those blacks for the very small areas that you really need it, and you'll get the biggest impact from it that way. I'm already starting to think about what will complement with green, and I'm thinking that I'd like a burgundy sort of red to go with it, and that's very orange. Sometimes these colours look nothing like the caps. Perhaps what I can do is have a go at mixing up some colours and see what I think. You'd think with 100 markers you would have enough colours, but sometimes no, you don't. And this is an easy way to do some colour mixing on the plate with some very budget-friendly markers. It's a very economical way to start learning some colour mixing. If you're nervous about using watercolour paints, whether it's from a tube or a palette, and mixing up colours and wasting paint because you don't know what you're doing, this might be something to have a go at. You know, prior to jumping into that sort of thing, if that makes you nervous. So I'm going to try and keep my colours light again until I've got myself a sort of colour scheme worked out. I've given this absolutely no thought. I've literally opened the book this morning and thought, yep, she's cute, let's have a go at this one. And apart from the title being called Wood Elfling, I've got absolutely no thoughts at all on the picture. So I just wanted to have a go with these markers in this way. And to be honest, I'm really liking them so far. I've never actually worked with them this way before. I tend to generally colour directly onto the page and then try to dilute them on the page. Is how I've worked with these sorts of markers before. So what I want to do is bring in just a little bit more of that sort of purpley pink to make it a little bit deeper. And I'm going to do the stripes on her tights. So by keeping your washes quite light and airy, the grayscale underneath that's already there, courtesy of Christine's beautiful artwork, is going to do a lot of the work for you. And you're not actually going to have to think too much about those deeper shades required, because her grayscale is actually coming through the wash and doing some of that work for you. And with very minimal effort on our part, these pages turn out really quite pretty. So I'd suggest when you're colour mixing that you keep the colours of the markers out to the side until you're finished with them, so you don't forget which ones you were using. And it does require a little bit of playing and a little bit of experimenting till, if you haven't created enough colour for that first wash that you created and you're going to have to make some more, it is a bit hit and miss mixing up exactly the same shade again. And that's kind of the fun and the beauty of watercolour a little bit. Try not to get too hung up about it if you don't mix it exactly the same. As long as you've got those two same colours, it is going to blend in, even if you haven't got it exactly the same. So I'm using a little bit more of that purpley colour there, and I'm just going to suggest on this outer edge of her leg that it's a bit darker. I'm sorry for the phone ringing there, we'll just have to ignore that. The answering machine will get it. Quite often it's call centres, and as soon as they hear that answering machine they hang up anyway. Now, if you don't like your hard edges when you've put some extra colour in there, just use the tip of the brush to gently blend that edge in until you're happy with it. Sometimes the hard edges are fun and they add a little something to a drawing or an illustration, but if you're not liking it, just gently pat at the edges of it with the damp brush and encourage the colour to blend more softly. Okay, so I'm actually going to bring some green back into those tights as well. She's going to be quite a colourful little elfling here, but I'm going to bring a different green, more of a yellowy green in. And that is working really rather nicely. I'd have to say, colour-wise, it's looking very comparable to the dearer brush pens that I've been using. I have no idea about light fastness with the other pens that I've been using. I can say without a doubt that Crayola are not going to be light fast, so therefore the quality is an issue if you're going to have your work on show. But if you're just going to keep your book closed and be looking through your book from time to time, these colours are very pretty and on a par with what I've been using with those dearer products. And the washes are actually working very nicely. So just a little tip here, I probably should have waited a little bit longer to make sure that that pinky colour was entirely dry before I come back doing these green stripes, because if any of it was damp, it's all going to bleed into each other. So I was taking a bit of a risk there, but luckily it has worked. If you're unsure of your brush skills, please do leave a little bit of extra time, drying time there for your first washes before you come right up next to it with a different colour, because if it overlaps it is going to bleed. So I'm just very lightly touching the very tip of the brush there to the paper. And I'm just coming back there with some of the areas that have the grey scale and darkening up some of that. I've got a bit more of a bluey green mixed into that mix now. So I'm getting the feeling from the grey scale that the lighter areas are hitting sort of down this section. So this part of her side of her body and her arm are going to be a bit more shadowed. And with watercolour you can just keep layering up those same washes and they will start to look darker. Wait for the first layer to dry and then come back with another layer. Just like you would if you were using the marker and you let the marker dry and then came back and put another layer on and it would look a bit darker. It's the same concept. Instead of working directly with the marker, I'm just using this tool to apply it. So when you've done a wash, just come back and see how it's drying. If you don't like how that edge is bleeding or whether it's not looking quite right, just use the very damp clean brush to keep touching the edge of it until it blends back and it starts to dry in a way that you want it to. You can do that. Okay, I think I'd like to do this little sort of dungaree dress that she's got on. I'd like a much deeper shade of green. That one's looking pretty good. Maybe just, I'm going to do a little touch of black to the side here. That's a very greenish looking black. Maybe that's meant to be a dark green as well, I don't know. But let's let's touch a little bit of that into the green. So I'm doing a very less vibrant green than what's going on there. So even though I'm using slightly deeper colours, again, just a light wash, and I'll build it up gradually again. Sometimes I like to keep things like pockets and patches like leave it till the last, because what I like to do is make them perhaps a little bit lighter. I'm thinking about, you know, when you've worn something quite a bit and you've washed it and washed it and washed it, and quite often things like that tend to be the most faded, lighter parts. So by leaving it white now, I'm giving myself the option to make that a little bit lighter in the end, and if I don't like the way it looks, I can always come back and deepen the colour up and match it into the rest of the outfit then if I want to. Okay, and things, you know, when you're doing a fabric, think about what type of fabric you want it to look like. So some fabrics that are very dense, and if it was a new outfit, the colour is going to be very regular in its intensity. If, however, you want to suggest it's old, then you're going to want some lighter and darker areas. Make it a little bit sort of faded in some spots and a bit patchy. If it's a shiny, reflective fabric, you need to allow some highlights, pretty strong, bright highlights that are going to show on that, as well as some very deep darks. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're colouring. What actually do you want to convey? What information can you convey about what that fabric is? And if you've got any doubts about how to do it, as always, there's trusty Google. Google some images about, you know, if you want it to look like corduroy, Google that, get some ideas about how the light falls on it. You know, what little tricks you might be able to use to actually show that it is in fact that. So I think what I'll do is that lighter green that I used at the beginning, I'm going to use that to start with on the pocket, so that it tones in, but it's not too matchy. And I think that she's going to have a red apple. I'm thinking these sorts of tones for the hat would be nice, but maybe with a touch more redness to it. So I'm just going to use a little bit more of that. And that. This box is very nice that the Supertips come in, but it's not that easy to get the markers back in. So let's mix all this up and see what happens. And we might put a bit of red in there as well. It's quite an orangey red that I've chosen there. I don't think it's actually achieving very much at all, but we'll do that for the first layer and then we can always come back later. I've got a big bulky jumper on today to keep warm, so that is getting in the way a little bit. Now I'm going to try and keep these little spots on the hat white because the mushrooms or fungi that the hat's based on, the little specks are lighter coloured. And I don't really want to introduce too much white back into the picture because this paper is quite cream. And if I bring in a white acrylic paint pen, it is going to look very obvious. So if I do need to do that, I'm going to have to be quite conservative in my use of white paint. This doesn't necessarily have to stay completely like a watercolour wash, but it will be my initial aim to do that, just because I'm experimenting and I want to see just how similar we can get a Crayola Supertip to look like watercolour paint. Now I'm not soaking this paper because it doesn't like a lot of water. It's going to respond better at the less water that I use on it, which is a bit sad because you can't get the true watercolour effects with the markers without a lot of water, but we'll go with it. Now, if, for example, it's become a little bit too solid in colour and you want to lighten it up, I'm just going to squeeze that brush and I've just dropped a drop of clean water into there, and you'll see, hopefully, how it introduces a highlight back into there. Very, very light touch here again. My wrist is well off of the page here, so I don't have great brush control, but I'm just using very, very light touch, and I'm letting the water and the pigment do the work rather than the brush. Now I have to say, I don't know why I've been so reluctant to use the plate or a piece of plastic or whatever. It doesn't have to be a plate, as long as it's a non-porous washable surface. I really don't know why I've resisted doing that with the markers for so long, because it really is a very relaxing and lovely way to work. And the colours just look so pretty. You know, there are times when I really love that vibrant saturated colour and the marker is great for that. But this is very subtle and it's really pretty. Plus, it is very relaxing to me to sit here and do this. So that's great. Now that the shoes are dry, I'm going to just pop a little bit of that into areas of the shoes or boots, to maybe just suggest that, you know, they're not necessarily the cleanest. going to be wear and tear. She's a wood elfling, so perhaps she might be a little bit heavy on her clothes. And I'm going to introduce that into these areas that will have a bit of shape, and there is some grey scale there to suggest the shadows. So I'm just putting that slightly deeper tone that I mixed up there into it. It's coming along quite nicely. Now I want a really deep, almost the colour of her hat, but maybe a little bit sort of warmer for the apple. So I'm going to use the same colours that I had, but in a slightly different ratio of colour, and see whether we can get a nice sort of apple red, but it's going to tone in with those other colours because I've made them all with the same colours but just in slightly different ratios. And at this stage I've stuck to the areas of grayscale. I've tried to preserve the very, very light areas that Christine's left and the highlights, and then we can always put a bit of colour on there later if we feel like they're not right. But remember, you know, it's hard to get that back once it's gone. And I'm going to put that colour on the little flowers on her patch. And a little bit of the darker stuff as well. And we're just going to put some colour onto that one. And we're going to make that one a little bit darker. And I want a little bit darker under here. That's quite wet and it needs to dry, but it is making the paper cockle up a bit there. Okay, so how far along are we? Okay, just over half an hour. I'll do a little bit more and then I'll call this one quits. So I've just cleaned all that red off, and now I'm just going to bring in some of these different greens that I pulled out earlier. These ones are a little bit more yellow. So I've got those different greens. Make sure that I've got as much of that red out of there as possible, because then it will just go to brown. I'll just make mud. And I'm just going to roughly blend this onto the paper. So I'm just mixing up the ways that I'm actually using it, just to see what it's doing, what it looks like. No, there's no reason for it. I'm just playing. I'm just experimenting. And I don't want this to look like a well planned and thought it out bit of grass here. I'm actually going to try and leave it a bit sort of rough and ready and splashy. Very technical terms that I'm using. I might just put a bit of water into there. I want some of those watercolour-y wash type effects going on. Okay, and the flower itself, I kind of want a brownish, tanny sort of centre, but not solid. So bring some other colour into there as well. The great thing about working with the plate too is that I haven't committed it to the paper yet. I can always change my mind and just wipe it back off the plate. Seriously don't know why I've resisted doing this method for so long. It is quite handy. And I'd like this to be sort of a murky yellow, like a mustardy. Mustardy yellow, so we'll use a bit of that colour, and maybe, oh no, that's fluorescent. Let's get rid of that one. Yeah, that'll do. Yep, that's nice. Can always use a little bit of the mustardy deeper colour for come back and suggest some form. But that will do for the start. And I could probably suggest some of that onto the patch on her knee as well. Might be like one of those little sort of Liberty fabrics. Bit of green in there as well. And I'm just going to suggest that colour onto the snail to start with as well. Now I've got my colours, because I'm tipping the plate, they're all starting to run into each other. So I'm going to end up with mud very soon. So we can clean off and start again. Okay, so I think I might leave that there. And I will come back with part 2 for those of you who'd like to follow along. So you can see the colours that I've used on my plate there. The good thing too about that is that I can keep that plate there. Even if that dries up, I can reactivate it with some water when I come back. So that's how that dropping the clean water into the solid colour has started to bleed up there on the hat and down here in the grass. So all in all, I'm really happy with that start. Those Crayola Supertips have been very, very nice to work with. Okay, so thank you for watching. If you want to see a little bit more of this one, I will be back with part 2 very shortly. Thanks for watching. Bye now.